We live in a world that's busier than ever, more crowded than ever, 7.1 billion people. It seems like all 7.1 billion of them, in fact, have blogs or podcasts or are somehow screaming for their message to be heard. The question these days is no longer, how do you get your message out there? The question is, how do you stand out? How do you make sure that your ideas, the most impactful, the ones that can really change the world, get noticed and recognized by the right people? Over the past couple of years, I've had the privilege of interviewing more than 50 top thought leaders in a variety of different fields, and have worked to understand how it was that they became recognized experts and how they built a following around their ideas. What I discovered is that there are three common patterns to any idea that gains resonance, that has an impact, that goes viral. It starts with one-to-one idea transmission, which I'll explain in a moment. It then goes from one to many, and then finally, when the idea truly takes flight, it's many-to-many idea transmission. So let me start by telling you a story about this woman. Her name is Carrie Anderson, and she actually began her career as a reporter. She ultimately worked for NBC, the Wall Street Journal. She won Emmys. But early in her career, she decided that she wanted to bring together a group of fellow journalists to trade ideas about best practices and sources. And so they started meeting every month just to share ideas. They enjoyed it. They built a bond. They kept doing it. And in fact, several years later, she left the profession. So in 1994, she decided to start another group. She'd become a professional speaker. And so she started a monthly speakers group where she brought together somewhere between half a dozen and 10 like-minded colleagues, once again, to trade referrals, trade ideas. She has now, when I interviewed her for my book, she has now been meeting with one group for nearly 30 years every single month, the other group nearly 20 years every single month. She told me that this was the most singular professional experience of her life because she had access to something that too few of us have in the modern world, which is a group of trusted colleagues. Call it a kitchen cabinet, a mastermind group, a personal board of directors, but a group of people whom you know have your best interest at heart, and a group of people who are not afraid to tell you the truth and give you honest feedback. When it comes to building a following around your ideas, the first step is really understanding which ideas are good and which ones aren't. And if you can't get that honest feedback to begin with, it becomes very difficult to be able to have an idea that really has an impact in the world. But of course, for many of us, the challenge is that we don't yet have the exact network that we need in order to move forward. We may have a good network, a strong network, but for almost all of us, we don't yet know all the people that we need to know in order to achieve the level of professional success that we'd like. So how do we build that network? What does that process look like? So one person who I think has a lot of insights into that is this gentleman, John Corcoran. I met John a couple of years ago at a conference, and shortly thereafter, he invited me to be a guest on his podcast, which is called Smart Business Revolution. And it turns out I'm not the only person. John has built up a really successful podcast, and in the process has built an amazing network. He told me that when he started the podcast, in a lot of ways it was a form of professional development, that he might not be an expert on Facebook advertising or on LinkedIn or any of the other topics that he interviews guests on, but he could become one by proxy. He could become more educated. He could ask them questions and learn from that. And that was valuable to him. It was also valuable, of course, to be creating content so that people who might become clients of his, he's an attorney, might listen to his podcast and say, oh, that John is a smart guy. I need to hire him. It's valuable for those reasons too. But what I think is often overlooked is the fact that particularly when we are looking to build our networks with successful people, they are barraged, they're deluged with requests. And getting one more email that says, can I pick your brain? Can I take you to lunch? Can I take you for a cup of coffee? If you don't know the person very well to begin with, that appears on the surface like a kind of value extraction. You want something from that person. But if you approach them with value, if you approach them with an offer of, can I interview you for my podcast? Can I interview you for my blog? You're giving them something back. You're giving them a platform to be able to share their ideas with the world, which is valuable to almost everybody. And so John, through his podcast, has been able to build a tremendous network. And it's a strategy that I think can work for all of us, is asking, if we are expanding our networks, how can we lead with value? How can we make sure that the people that we want to connect with recognize that up front we're giving to them as well? That's the first stage of building a following around your ideas, is one-to-one, going to your existing group of trusted colleagues and expanding strategically. But second, the part that's probably most visible when it comes to building a following around your ideas is one-to-many idea transmission. This is sharing your ideas writ large. And we all know the typical ways. Maybe you give a speech, maybe you write a blog, somehow you are putting your ideas out there. I think too often people go immediately to this stage, in fact, and they skip the one-to-one. They skip talking it over with their friends and colleagues and realizing sometimes that just a 10% tweak of an idea can mean the difference between something that succeeds and resonates and something that the marketplace doesn't appreciate. But I wanted to tell you the story of this gentleman, Robert Scoble, who's a well-known technology opinion leader, because he taught me something interesting when I spoke with him about this form of one-to-many idea transmission. So Robert gets a lot of emails. He gets thousands of emails a day. He can't possibly respond to all of them. So he told me that when he receives a question from someone that he thinks is an interesting question, what he actually does is he writes back and says, can you ask this question on Quora, the question and answer website? And when they do, he answers them there. Because he said, if I email one person back, I'm helping one person. But if I answer it on Quora, I'm helping 5 people, or 50 people, or 500 people. The real question when it comes to spreading our ideas and building a following around your ideas is, how do you access leverage? How do you leverage your time? How do you leverage your impact? Instead of sending the email, answer the question on the web. Instead of doing one small thing where you're putting out information, how do you spread it to many people? If you can do that, if you can master that transition, you are raising a beacon. You are letting like-minded people find you. And that's incredibly powerful. They can come to you and your movement starts building. It starts gaining momentum. But that's not the final stage. What comes next is many-to-many idea transmission. Because the truth is, even the greatest idea, if you were the only one propounding it, if you were the only one talking about it, it's not going to be sufficient. You need others to become your ambassadors. You need other people spreading your idea. But they're never going to do it if your idea is all about you. Your idea has to somehow resonate. It has to somehow have meaning for people beyond you. Sheryl Sandberg, if the sum total of her message about Lean In was, hey, I have a book called Lean In, please buy it, that's a great message for Sheryl Sandberg and no one else. That message stops and dies there. But if your message instead is about women's empowerment, if it's about the importance of making sure that every woman everywhere steps up, raises her hand, volunteers, says, I want the raise, I want the opportunity, let me give it a try. That's something that's powerful enough that other people can see themselves in it. It makes them not just want to buy her book, but to start a Lean In circle, to spread the message, to talk about it. The same phenomenon happened with Eric Ries. Eric was the author of a very successful book called The Lean Startup. It's an interesting melange. He took lean manufacturing principles, which Toyota perfected. It's the ultimate in old school industrial automation techniques. and he applied it to entrepreneurship, to startups. And he created this blend that proved to be incredibly interesting and useful for practitioners of these startup arts. There are probably even more now, but at the time I was doing my research, there were meetups for lean startup groups in more than 70 countries, and more than 350,000 people were involved in the process. That doesn't happen if you have a message that's all about you. It's about creating an idea that has meaning for the world, that other people can say, I see myself in that, I can benefit from that. And when you start and go through that process, when you go through the process of one-to-one idea transmission, vetting it with your friends and allies, saying, do you see this? Do you see it having meaning for other people? When you sharpen it and hone it, then you can begin to bring it to the masses with that one-to-many idea transmission. You can begin to blog, to speak, to share your ideas on Quora, and to make yourself findable by like-minded people. You may have the greatest idea in the world, but if other people can't find you with a web search, if they don't know that you're out there, it's not going to move forward. And then finally, as they discover you, it builds enough momentum that it's no longer just you. A chorus builds. You're at Manytomany. You've reached the tipping point. And you've built a following because other people care enough about your idea that they are building your idea and your movement for you. The challenge today is not stating your idea. It's not getting your message out there. It's about how to stand out. It's about how to make sure that your best ideas have the impact that they deserve to have in the world. And that's what we're talking about today in how to build a following around your ideas. Thank you.